Alright, so the first one I ask you is the sine of 3 pi over 4. The very first thing I need to determine is where is 3 pi over 4. Okay, so I know that this is 0 and this is pi. So pi would be 4 pi over 4, because 4 over 4 is 1 and that's where 1 pi is. So that means 3 over pi would be in this quadrant right here. Well, what you remember about your signs, your SIGN signs, is you can remember all students take calculus. So that means in quadrant 2, the sign is positive. So this is going to be a positive result. I don't know what the answer is yet, but I know it's going to be a positive result. Now, the other thing that I notice about this one is your reference angle is pi over 4. So if I think of pi over 4, tell you what I'll do is I'll draw it out over here. Pi over 4 looks like this. 1, 1, and the square root of 2. Okay, let's actually go ahead and do all of them. 30 degrees is pi over 6, and that's 1, 2, and the square root of 3. And 60 degrees is pi over 3, and that's square root of 3, 2, and 1. You'll say, now how do you know those? I memorize them. So what you see in the red here and what you see in the blue, I memorize that each and every semester, and I just write it down before I get a test or on the final. I write it down as soon as I get my test, and then I just refer back to it. So for this particular one, I know my answer is positive, and I know that the reference angle is pi over 4. Here's pi over 4 up here. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so it would be 1 over the square root of 2. Okay, and that's what that one looks like. Okay, so let's go across to tangent of 7 pi over 4. Okay, so 7 pi over 4, let's see where it is. And if I go around here, that's pi. So that's actually 4 pi over 4. So it would be 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4. So it would actually be in this quadrant right here. So again, it would be 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4. That locates me in quadrant 4. In quadrant 4, the cosine is positive. That means everything else is negative. So that means the tangent is negative. Okay, looking at my pi over 4 reference angle, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. So this answer would be negative 1. Okay, at the bottom I have the cosine of negative 2 pi over 3. Okay, negative means we're going in the opposite direction. So if I look at this one going in this direction, that would be negative 1 pi over 3. So negative 2 pi over 3 would be located here. That's quadrant 3. In quadrant 3, the tangent is positive, but all of your other basic trig functions are negative. So if the tangent is positive, that means the cosine is negative. So I'm going to have a negative answer here. I have a pi over 3 reference angle. So pi over 3 is here at the bottom. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. My answer would be a negative 1/2. Okay, my next one is sine of pi over 3. Well, that's just in your first quadrant. Everything in the first quadrant is positive. So when you look at that one, A stands for all. All functions are positive here. So the sine is positive. Looking at my pi over 3 reference triangle, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So that would be square root of 3 over 2. And that's how it would look. Great, looking at a few more. The next one that you have is tangent of 3 pi over 2. Okay, 3 pi over 2 is a reference angle. 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. Now you remember in my last video, I showed you to do that with points. If you look at that particular point there, that's the point 0, negative 1. Cosine, sine. So when I get ready to do this one, I know the tangent is sine over cosine. So the sine here is negative 1 and the cosine is 0. That means this answer would be undefined. Okay, the next one is cosine of 7 pi over 6. Okay, so if we look around, as a reference point, this is pi. So I always think of that as 6 pi over 6 when we're turning it into 6, because 6 over 6 is 1 pi, so that's where it would be. So if we run all the way around, that's 1 pi, 6 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6 would be right here. Looking back at your notes on the previous page, in that particular quadrant, the tangent is positive. That means cosine is negative. Okay, I don't have my reference angles pulled up, so I'll just draw it out really fast. Pi over 6 is 30 degrees, 1, 2, and the square root of 3. So when we get ready to do this one, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent over hypotenuse. And that's what that one would look like. Okay, the last one you see here is another quadrantal angle, and I ask you for pi. Well, here's pi right here. If you look at these coordinates, that would be -1, 0. I ask you for the sine. Your sine would be 0. And that's it.